Okay, before we get started this morning on movies, I wanted to talk about the test. Test will be Friday. It will cover everything that is in your PowerPoints tab on Blackboard. You can see that I've moved all the old lectures into folders, into test material 1 and 2. And the only thing remaining is lectures 15, 16, 17, and 18, business entities, defamation, story of television, and cyberspace and internet law. So those will be the areas that will be covered on the test. Okay. The lecture that we're doing today will not be on the test. The test will be the same format we've been having. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So, let's talk about the motion picture industry. This is probably one of the reasons you took entertainment law and licensing, and why many of you are in the industry studies area as opposed to the music industry. There are other components of entertainment law which sometimes don't get talked about much in Nashville, Tennessee, Music City. And the motion picture industry is one of those. As an entertainment attorney, you will be exposed to a lot related to the motion picture industry, even if your focus is on music law, because entertainers, no matter who they are creative people, and creative people sometimes do other things, such as Tim McGraw acting in movies and other musicians acting in movies. So what is the motion picture industry? Well, let's get started with a little retro clip here. This just leads right into our lecture. I just thought that was kind of cool. Okay, so what is the motion picture industry? Well, when we talk about motion pictures, that can be a lot of different things. That can be anything from a home movie, such as the Blair Witch Project, to full-length documentaries, how-to films, industrial films, not just the Hollywood motion pictures that we all think about when we think of the motion picture industry. So virtually anything that has a moving image is part of the industry. You will find clients in all aspects of the industry. I just did a whole clearance project for a documentary filmmaker, and that is a massive project. You have to clear all the copyrights, all the trademarks, all the interviews. Everything has to be cleared legally before such person can obtain, for example, errors and omission insurance or copyright infringement insurance. So your clients can come from all different sectors of the industry. And of course, because of that, there are numerous ways to study this industry. The way I intend to study it is to take a bird's eye view of the history of motion pictures, and then focus in on the financing of the industry. It will be based on the understanding not only of history and business, but also the legal background of the industry. So we'll look at those aspects, of course, as well. The most obvious place to start is with the makeup and financing of feature films and the films that we all know and love from Hollywood. Films like Ben-Hur. Independent productions are variations of the same theme. They may not involve the complexity that we'll be looking at and the breadth that we'll be looking at, but they involve some of the same principles. In order to film something, you have to have money. You have to get money. You have to find people who are willing to invest in your project. All of these things happen at the base level of independent filmmaking and all the way up through major motion pictures. This is, however, the major dividing line in the analysis of the motion picture industry. Independents versus majors, much like it is in music. So that is the major dividing line. Or you can think of the majors as the studios, if you will. The phrase major studios generally refers to those large complexes that we visit when we travel to California. Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, Disney, etc., etc. Those are the majors of the film industry. So when we talk about major studios, that is what we're referring to. The Golden Age studios, the studios that grew up in the nascent forming movie industry, still exist in some form or another. Now, many of them have merged and acquired others, but they all still exist in some form or fashion. All still out there. So what is the role of the major studio? Well, of course, as I said, if you're going to make a motion picture, you have to finance it. One thing you'll soon learn in life, if you don't know it already, is that everything costs money. It's a fact of life, like taxes or death. If you want something good, usually you have to pay for it, don't you? In one way or another, either through labor or through money. So the role of the major studios is to finance the production of motion pictures. They are responsible globally for about 25% of all feature films each year. Now, that's a pretty large number. Of course, you've got things like Bollywood in there from India. You have independents in there. But 25% of any industry is a major chunk. So the major studio is responsible for about 25% of all feature films each year. Now, a budget for films, and when I say films, I mean all of them, can be anywhere from $750,000, which would be small for a major studio, up to $300 million, or maybe even more. So the budget can spread all over the place, depending on what stage of development the studio is in. If it's in a crisis situation financially, the budget may be lower. So the budget can be high, it can be low. All in all, the majors on average spend about $150 million per film in production, excluding marketing. Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, cost $270 million to make. For that money, the studio could have become one of the largest venture capital firms in the country, owning a piece of hundreds of startups. Think about that, $270 million. You could start up your own joint venture firm, investing in entrepreneurs. So why do major studios do it? It's a good question. It is a risky business, isn't it? Just like music. You're taking a gamble on the creative. But people enjoy films. People enjoy going to the movies. They always have. And that's why people do it. But having said that, studios make a lot of money off the films. There's usually, with these major studios, a profit involved every year. And the profit can be huge. Pirates grossed $1 billion worldwide. Not a bad turn of profit, is it? $270 million. That's about a 400% gain on a return on your investment. Not bad. But unlike joint venture firms or the automobile industry or any other industry you look at, it's very difficult to predict when a film is going to be successful. I'm sure they had their market analysis, but the studio wasn't certain that when they spent $270 million on Pirates, that it was going to generate $1 billion. It could have just as easily generated $200 million and turned a loss. So it's hard to predict the whims of the public, and particularly the movie-going public. Unlike a car company, you can kind of predict if you build a car a certain way, people are going to buy it. If it has high gas mileage, that's going to attract a lot of people. Who would have thought the Prius would be one of the largest selling hybrids on the market? Not many people. It was ugly, it was little, it was inconvenient, but people wanted high gas mileage. It's nice to be able to get in the car and drive to Florida without having to fill up your gas tank more than once, maybe. Okay? So people bought that. It's predictable. People can, the trends in society with regard to cars can be ascertained a little more easily than the film-going public. So what happens? The movie studios play the odds. They play the odds. They put out a certain number of films, on average about 15 films a year, some as many as 30. In other words, they're throwing mud against the wall to see what sticks. That's kind of the way the music industry is. We're going to throw a bunch of crap up there, and hopefully some of it will stick. Hopefully enough of that will stick that it will pay us back for the money we spent on it. That's the idea. 2012, for example, there are approximately 650 domestic releases in the United States. And I dare say most of you can name a dozen of those that you saw, liked, and remembered. Maybe even saw twice. Not many of that number make it to the stage of Pirates of the Caribbean. Let's look at some of the numbers, the actual numbers of box office performances. For Disney, $1.5 billion in domestic gross. That's not their net. They had a release of 13 films. On average, that was about 119 million. They had 4 of those that were considered greater than 100 million or hits. Look at Fox. 15 films, 4 hits. Paramount, 13 film, 2 hits. Sony, 19 films, 6 hits. Universal, 16 films, 6 hits. Warner, 16 films, 5 hits. So they're doing a pretty good job, right? Putting out 15, 20 films, getting anywhere from 3 to 6 hits. So 6 hits is a good year. And those 6 hits will pay for the remaining 70% of the product. Not a bad deal. So the more they make, the more likely it is they'll produce a movie that turns a profit. Let's look at some examples of how this works. And what we're going to be looking at mainly is flops. But sometimes those flops get turned around in the international market. Waterworld. This was Universal Studios. Kevin Costner had produced Dances with Wolves. As you know, Dances with Wolves was highly successful, highly acclaimed. It's a little too long, but Kevin Costner was successful. Universal Studios says, okay, we've got somebody who can direct film and make us some money. Let's give him a little leeway here. See what he can do. Well, he spent millions of dollars building a tank of water and filming something that not very many people watched. Budget was $175 million, domestic gross $88 million. One of those that the domestic was half of what they spent making it. not a good day's work. The foreign gross, however, made up for it. It turned a profit in the foreign market. So what you'll see happening, you'll see a pattern in these flops. It's released domestically, and then it'll go straight to the foreign market. Why? Because they make a lot of money on the foreign market. People in the foreign market will watch something we in America won't. Why? I don't know. It's one of those mystique American things, but the foreign market likes to watch our films. You can almost always make your money back as a studio in foreign gross. But the domestic suffered. We had an unregulated director with a huge budget for such a film, and it didn't make its money in the domestic. Take The Avengers. Can't do it with a popular director who has had success. What about a well-liked television show, The Avengers, one of the most watched TV shows in the 60s? We can take that concept, flip it, and make it into a movie. Surely that will be successful. Warner Brothers thought so, as did the director. Had a budget of $60 million, a respectable budget. Domestic gross was $23 million. Not quite enough to pull it off. That film did not make its money back in the foreign market. Well, okay, we had an unregulated director, had a popular TV show. That didn't work. What if we collect an assembly of some of the most famous actors and actresses around? Winona Ryder, Brad Pitt, Anthony Hopkins. Surely we can make a successful film with those kind of box office draws, right? Budget, $90 million. We'll give them a little bit more than we gave the popular TV show. Domestic gross, again, less than half. You can't predict. Just because Brad Pitt has sold out many movies doesn't mean he's going to sell out this one. The foreign gross helped redeem it a little bit, brought us up to a profitable margin. But a powerhouse cast doesn't guarantee that mud is going to stick. Well, let's return to the television show idea. Let's instead, however, bring in a more popular director, Barry Sonnenfeld, who has produced some of the most incredible movies of all time. Rain Man, for example. Let's hire him. Maybe the director will make the difference. We'll give him a budget of $170 million. Of course, we had kind of a powerhouse cast here, too. Will Smith. Is that Winona again? I think it is. And then Kevin Kline. So we even have a powerhouse cast here. Who is that?
I'm not sure who that is, but
it's not Winona. Okay. Well, I don't know who it is either, but anyway, we have a powerhouse cast with Will Smith and Kevin Kline. Domestic gross not quite up to the budget with the famous director. So trying to predict the success of a film is somewhat like trying to predict the weather. You go out 2 hours, your weatherman's probably going to be pretty successful, about 80 to 100%. You go out one day, however, your weatherman prediction drops around 50-50. You and I could sit here and flip a coin and predict weather about as good. You go out 2 days, what happens? Well, the weatherman's prediction is probably closer to 25 or 30%. Go out a week, and you might as well be a fortune teller, right? Same with movies. You can't use the same tried and true methods in other businesses to predict the movies. Well, what if we used a very popular musician or entertainer? As I said earlier, when you're in the entertainment industry, sometimes your music clients are going to want to cross over and say, well, I've always wanted to act. I can do this. I can be successful. And usually the major studios are going to say, yeah, that's going to work. Surely Mariah Carey, as popular as she was, can turn a profit, right? Let's put her in a movie. That's what 20th Century Fox thought. They weren't real sure about it. They only invested $22 million as a budget. $22 million, pretty low in terms of budgets for movies. We still didn't do too well. $4.3 million. There are children who have designed apps who've made more money than that. So, you know, not a good formula. Well, what about Madonna? Madonna's more popular than Mariah Carey. Madonna's an icon, for goodness sake, right? She did Like a Virgin. I mean, she's been popular for years. Columbia thought so. Guy Ritchie thought so. Again, not real confident. But we'll give you $10 million to play with. We didn't even break $1 million. There are professors of colleges that make more money than that, who shall remain nameless. But having said all of that, all of the hoopla about famous flops, and you're always going to have them, it only takes one successful film to make up for all of those famous flops. And that is the philosophy of the studio. We know we're going to have a certain percentage of flops. It's inevitable. There's no secret formula. But we also know that if we make enough, we're going to have 2, 3, 4 hits, and those profit margins there are going to more than pay for our flops. So that's the philosophy. Look at these accidental successes. 1973, an unknown director notices that 20th Century Fox had shut down its animation department, its creative light and sound department. He decides to form his own company. He opens up a company called Industrial Light and Magic. Does anybody know who this is? Yep, exactly. He starts work on a relatively benign film, which he thought was going to be sort of a spoof on the space films. In fact, he viewed it somewhat as sort of a corny film, sort of a humorous jab at the industry. But he wanted to try out his visual effects. And he wanted a project he could do that with. So he started on Star Wars. 26th Century Fox ultimately picked it up. It had a budget, like Madonna's, of about $11 million. Not very much. It grossed $1.5 million in the first week. It had a domestic gross of $461 million at last count. So when you can generate that kind of profit, you're doing quite well. It had a foreign gross of $775 million. Probably one of the most successful films of all time. Does anybody know George Lucas's secret in all of that? What made him the billionaire? It wasn't these numbers, although these numbers helped. What one thing did he do, did he recognize, that made him a billionaire?
You buy the rights to the merchandise?
Exactly. He recognized the value of what we're talking about in this class, licensing, merchandising. He retained the merchandise rights for all films. So he's made $1 billion. Now, I think he recently sold those rights, but you know, he doesn't care. The 5 subsequent episodes have grossed $6 billion collectively worldwide. His merchandising rights have probably tripled that worldwide. The rule of thumb for marketing is to budget 50% of production costs toward marketing. So if you spend $100 million on the movie, you're going to have to spend at least $50 million on marketing, whether that be billboards, web, whatever. You're driving down the interstate, half of the billboards are for movies in the major cities, right? There's a reason for that. You walk into a movie theater, you see all of those advance posters and stand-ups. Those aren't there just because the movie theater is into movies. Those are there because the major studios have paid them money to put those there. Why? Because they know if you go to movies, you're going to walk past that. And you're going to be looking for that film when it comes out. There are a lot of tricks, and all of them cost money. So $50 million is nothing to market a $100 million film. In fact, a lot of studios have increased that budget of late to almost equal the production cost. In fact, in some cases, production costs can be less than marketing, depending on the film. On many films, as much as 50% of the domestic gross occurs in the opening week. So it's only natural you're going to want to spend that marketing dollar to get those people in the door the first week it opens. Otherwise, what's going to happen? The movie's going to fizzle out. About 4 weeks in, people are going to start saying, well, that movie's been out for a while. Let's see that movie. That's the new one, right? We all do it. 5, 6 weeks in, nobody's in that theater watching that movie. So you've got to make your money up front, and you've got to make it fast. And if it does happen to stay around for 6 weeks, you know you've got a big success. Now, many of the accidental successes occur from the independent region of filmmaking. And this is only natural. It's like music. Everybody's got a dream. Everybody's got a dream of being a recording artist in this town, right? Or a songwriter. They want one hit. That's all we need. 2 hits. And we're a millionaire, right? Same with movies. Independent filmmakers recognize that there's the possibility, through a number of sources we'll talk about later, like film festivals, to take your independent film production that you spent $50,000 on and take it into the major market and be successful. It happens frequently. But like being a recording artist and being a major recording artist, the odds are somewhat like being struck by lightning. So you need to be aware of that. But many of those accidental successes were independent origins. Independent refers to those that are not associated with the majors in any way. Now, independents sometimes make deals with majors, just like in this town. You've got an independent publishing company that you can negotiate a deal with Sony to be a sub-publishing arm of Sony. You've got a pretty good little deal. You've got funding. They get half of everything you do, but that's okay because you'll be successful if you've got that money behind you. But an independent generally refers to those that are not directly affiliated with the major studios. And they, most importantly, finance their film without the support of the major movie industry, the major studios. So I said we're going to look a little bit at the history of filmmaking. The roots of independent filmmaking can be traced back to the 1900s in this little building right here. Does anybody know who is responsible for inventing film? Well, a group of independents were resisting the control of the Motion Pictures Patent Company. And that company was owned by a few people. We'll recognize those in a minute. And this gives it away a little bit. It was also known as the Edison Trust. Motion Picture Patents Company, MPPA, or the Edison Trust. Thomas Edison is responsible for much of the technology that started the film industry. Started in the Bronx, around 1907. The MPPC was a trust established in 1908 by all the companies, including Edison, who was, as I said, the inventor of the projector, certain aspects of the film. It also included the leading distributor, George Klein, at the time, and it included the leading producer of film, which at the time was Kodak. So that made up the Edison Trust. When it was formed, Edison owned most of the major patents relating to the motion pictures, including the one for raw film. If you don't know what film is, it is some sort of acetate or raw bed of plastics, petroleum-based product, on which has been bonded or painted, essentially, a coating of some light-sensitive material. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, obviously, but the raw film patent was owned by Edison. Kodak produced the one with the emulsion on it. The MPPC also controlled, by virtue of all those patents, the kinetoscope, which was an early device for showing the movies. They placed a notice on those machines demanding that they only be used with the other patents owned by the company. In other words, if you're going to use our machine to show films, you have to use film by Kodak, and it has to be distributed by Klein. Otherwise, you can't show it. So they were very restrictive in protecting their major device. They would vigorously enforce these patents against independent film houses, independent film makers, and really squashed out the independent. And they would frequently sue them, frequently receive injunctions against them to stop their business. As a result, of course, when you put your thumb down against somebody, what's going to happen? There's going to be a revolt. If history has taught us anything, it's that. If you oppress people long enough, they're going to object, and they're going to revolt. So it happens in society. It happened here. These independent filmmakers says, well, hell, he invented a camera. We know the basic technology. Let's invent one ourselves. So they did. They created their own cameras. They moved to California to get away from New York, where the MPPC had most of its power. In those days, of course, suing in California when you're a New York company was extremely cost prohibitive. At best, you could take a train across at some point in history, but even that took a long time. Then you'd have to find your lawyers. It was just too much trouble. And they were quite happy that these independents had left for California. So they were happy to stay in New York and do their business there. Of course, in California, as we saw earlier, land was cheap. The independent filmmakers thrived, and they became the majors. They became Hollywood. So that distance solved the problem. But one company, one of the independents, Universal Film Manufacturing Company, the predecessor to what is now Universal, claimed that it had the right to use that kinetoscope because of an implied license. I purchased the device, therefore I have the license to use it. And I can use any media I want to put in it, including the film we're making out here in California. So this went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's called the Motion Picture Patent Company versus Universal Film Manufacturing. The decision came down that Universal was correct. You do have an implied license, and they can't keep you from using the machine that you purchased. It held that a patent owner cannot require the licensee of a patented machine to use a separate patent owned by the licensor. So you, MPPC, you cannot restrict the owner of that patented machine and make them use your patented film. That would be like a car manufacturer requiring you to purchase gas from a gasoline company owned by the car manufacturer. Right? That's illegal. That's a restraint of trade, and that's what the Supreme Court said. So that effectively gutted the powers of the MPPC forever, because they were, in fact, a collection of patents. It also laid the groundwork for the creation of Hollywood. And that's when the independents became the majors, and that's when Hollywood was formed and born. And they are now, of course, the dominant force in the industry. So the independents became the majors, as sometimes happens. Now, of course, the word independent in reference to filmmaking has taken on the meanings that we've ascribed to it earlier. And now anybody can be a filmmaker. You can go out and buy a high-definition digital camera, what, $500? It may even be cheaper now, I'm not sure. You all have the capability on your Macs or on any Ultrabook to download video editing software that is as sophisticated as the Hollywood major studios use. In fact, you can download the same and buy the same software that they use, that many of them use. And so you can edit your own film. So an independent can be anybody sitting in this room. We can all make well-crafted, beautiful films, right? All it takes is a little of these devices. So the hardware has come down in price. The software has simplified post-production. So we can all do it. Still, the semantics of when an independent is actually an independent can be confusing because of all the contractual relationships that an independent can go through before an independent film becomes a major distributed film. So there are myriad variations on the theme of what an independent truly means. You or I may start out as an independent filmmaker, get approached by a film agent to take our film to the distributors, get associated with the distribution company, start getting funding from the distribution company, and become what is essentially just like the majors. So those lines are crossed. Being an independent has a lot of advantages, just like it does in the music industry. You have total control over what you're doing. You have the creative freedom that you need to create anything you want. You don't have to go through any channels. You don't have to get the approval of a board. You don't have to get the approval of a president, a creative director, an A&R director, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have all the creative freedom. Of course, with that comes the lower budget and the restrictions that that implies. You can't hire the major actors. You can't hire the great script writers. You can't do any of that because you don't have the budget. All you can do is go out with your nice little camera, shoot some footage of your friends acting, and make your film. It might work, but chances are not as good. But you are more nimble than a major. So those are the advantages. Look at this example. Hickson Films, $25,000 budget for that movie I mentioned earlier, Blair Witch Project, probably one of the most successful independents of all time. Final budget through various deals with distributors and other associated people ended up being $750,000. Still not even breaking $1 million. It grossed $248 million worldwide. I want to caution you that that is an exception. Most independent films don't reach that kind of success. But if you've seen the film, you know that it was, quite simply, somebody like you who went out and filmed this with their little video camera. Edited it, I'm sure, on a Mac, and it gained some success in a film festival, right? And that became that success. Regardless of whether it's a major production or an independent production, we can divide the phases of producing a film into two categories. There is the production phase, and then there is the distribution phase. As I said, production is the easier of the two generally. It's easy to produce something. The distribution, however, just like music, starts to be where the rubber meets the road. Anybody can make a film and throw it up on YouTube. But how many films are on YouTube? I'm sure we're close to 1 billion, if not more. Is anybody going to watch your film? Yeah, the handful of friends that you send it to on Facebook that happen to take the time to click on that link might watch it. But that's not distribution, is it? That's like our music videos that we throw up there that nobody sees. In order to distribute it, you really have to work it through the proper channels, have a relationship with a major distribution house, have some success at a film festival, and do some other things that are going to draw some marketing notoriety to your film. So distribution is the key. Of course, without production, there's no product, but without distribution, there aren't going to be any sales. And if anything, if the music industry teaches you anything, it's that. I've had many clients who were successful at getting out there, touring, making a little bit of money, hand to mouth, on the road. But if you can't sell your product, if nobody buys your product, you're going to end up selling liquor at a liquor store to make money. So what does distribution include? It includes advertising, it includes marketing, and of course includes getting the product out to the people in some way. So without sales, there's no revenue. Without revenue, there's no profit. And that's why this sad face on the little guy over here, who is our accountant. So, for production of a film, we still have to have money, right? We haven't even got to the distribution yet. With production, you've got to have some form of financing. So we can say, well, let's go to Bank of America. They'll give us a loan. After all, this is the best movie idea since Audrey Hepburn, right? This is my dream. This is everything. I will go to the bank. I will get a loan. How do you think that's going to fly? Probably about as well as the proverbial lead balloon. They're not going to give you a loan based on nothing. Well, if you have some equity in your house, what about that? Well, yeah. If you've got something that you can trade and risk for your film that the bank can then foreclose on if you're unsuccessful, then yeah, they'll give you a loan. But generally, banks do not like loaning money to filmmakers any more than they like loaning money to songwriters, just on the basis that they're going to write a hit song. If you've got a flow of revenue, that's different, but banks generally do not like the creative sector because of all these uncertainties we've talked about. And when you think about it, it makes sense. The filmmaker is simply asking the financial world to accept their vision of what this film is going to be or what this piece of music is going to be. And they have to trust that producer that they're going to deliver it. That, for a financial person, for a business person, is a huge, huge leap of faith. And unless you have a sugar daddy or a sugar mama in your back pocket, you're not going to get financing from many of those people. So the idea is to try to produce a film as an independent for as little as possible. Try to scrap together enough money to make the film. Maybe find somebody some local nonprofit who will fund it, some city funding agency that will give you a grant. But that's only for your first film. If you're successful, like George Lucas was, you'll have people beating down your door with money. It becomes much and much more easier as you develop hit after hit after hit after hit. Then you've got the money, like Kevin Costner, literally in your bank account to spend at your will. But you better be successful every time, because if any one of these becomes a flop, what happens? You're back at ground zero. Don't pass go, go directly home, right? That's what happens. Now, having said that, with Star Wars, with all of these guys, the studios know the tricks. As we saw with the foreign market, they have ancillary income. They have licensing TV, licensing cable, licensing the overseas rights, creating tie-in video games, creating amusement park rides, creating endorsement opportunities which advertisers pay for, product placement in the movies. Those are no accident. Jerry Seinfeld in his kitchen had boxes of cereal. Was that an accident? No. Those people paid money to be placed in Jerry Seinfeld's kitchen, just as any advertiser would pay good money to be in a major box office hit. They love that. So that's where endorsement comes in. That's where licensing comes in. And that's where we're going to stop today. We will pick this up Wednesday. And again, just to reiterate, the test will be Friday. And it's on the material that's in your PowerPoint section out in the open there. Lectures 15, 16, 17, and 18. Okay? All right. Thanks. Have a good afternoon. Amber, where did we say we were meeting? Bongo, okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.